So we are going to be talking about a project that we worked on early last year, Cabinet of Curiosities by Guillermo del Toro. And we worked on the second episode of the show called Graveyard Rats. And we're supposed to render a lot of rats with a lot of fur. So let's quickly take a look on what we did. Thank you, and we're done. All right, so this is what we did, and client's mandate was like you have to render a lot of crowd agents, a lot of fur, and the issue was like, everything has to be up close to the camera. So these guys were, finicky little rats trying to get close to the camera, as you can see. This one is interesting because we see like a lot of displacement happening, a lot of high poly geometry, a lot of fur. Guess. Steve, sorry, I hope there's nobody Steve here, but we call him Steve. This one, tricky, but we didn't like him, so we killed him. Okay, but they actually killed us with all the disk space that we're generating and all the time it was taking to, generate these rats. And so this is what our talk is about. Like it's about space-time continuum. Oh, sorry, different talk. Space-time management optimization workflows that we came up with to deal with a lot of data that was being generated. So yeah, okay, a bit about ourselves. Oops, I thought I took this off. We are folks. My name is Amit Khanna. I am head of CG at Folks Toronto. I have been a journalist in my career. On a technical side, I've worked with crowds, I've worked with grooming, a lot of lighting. I've been a lighter for many years. And I've been a pipeline developer for almost 3 years. Now I am head of CG and I basically do nothing. So
manage.
Yes, manage.
I'm Mario Marengo and I've been doing stuff for a long time. Many things from lighting to rendering to coding to, long enough to have touched on everything.
Yep. Yeah, let's proceed in our presentation and you will see that what all yes. So we come from Folks Toronto. Folks has centers all over the globe. We have one in Saguenay, Montreal, Bogota, and a big one in Mumbai. And Folks belongs to a group called Pitch Black. And Pitch Black contains creative brands such as Fuse Effects, RSP, El Ranchito, and of course us, Folks. So, well, my slide is running before my speech. Well, so this is who we are. This is where we come from. And so I got you some stats to look at. If you look at the left side of the slide, these are the stats with single asset that we created, the rat asset that we created. And we have 150,000 polygons, 700-some thousand primitives for primitives. And then if you write all this data on disk, it was ending up being close to 100 MB. So not a big deal, like, small number, 100 MB is nothing. But if you look at the animation cache size on the disk, it's 700 MB on an average for like our smaller shots. Like the Alembic size on disk went up to like in gigabytes. So I'm taking smaller caches to give you a perspective of how much gains we did with smaller caches, and you can imagine like what happens with the bigger caches. So on the right-hand side, what I've done is I've just multiplied this one asset with 25 because we were exporting 25 rats from Maya to Houdini in Alembic. So 25 rats give you like 17.5 gigabytes, and only 10 iterations of this shot counts up to be 175 gigabytes. Now, it may not be a bigger number, but like in a studio setup, you have multiple shows running on, and you have like depending on how many shots you're doing, this number can pile up pretty quickly, and any savings that we can do, it's good. So all right, so we did some optimizations, and all the optimizations came in stages. Like the animation department was the first department that started exporting data. So and we saw like the data was just getting bigger and bigger. So we thought like we need to play smartly, otherwise we'll just end up fighting with IT for disk space. So animation, and then we moved on to simulations. Simulations in Houdini are very optimized in itself, but we did create some procedural controls in there to save input-output time. And now the post-Chache variation system, which we'll go over, it's an interesting one. It also saved us a lot, like going back and forth between Maya and Houdini, the two DCCs that we were working with. So I'm going to talk about these three items, and Mario is going to talk about the rendering side of things, how we created and why we created the render procedural that we use to render our rats with. Okay, so optimizing animation export. So this is the problem that we were facing. We were using Alembic as our primary format for data exchange. We didn't have a USD pipeline at that time. Like we had a pipeline, but it was not 100% there for us to start using it on a show which was like short-lived. We had tight deadlines. So we were using Alembics and had a lot of subframe data. So Alembic caches were just taking a lot of space on disk. And also they were taking a lot more time to get generated on network and on farm and so on. And because of these two reasons, the iterations were slower. So, and of course, like nothing was interactive inside of Houdini. When you must have noticed that like you bring in 2 to 3 Alembic files inside of Houdini, you cannot scrub the play bar. Although from lighting perspective, it doesn't matter because lighters are always just dealing with like a single frame. But as a last step in tech check, if you can scrub things, if the animation is playing fine, then you know that your renders are going to be good. So these were some of the issues that we faced. And I got you a sample shot, really small shot. It's taking like I'm showing 13 files, 13 rat files. And if you look at like our biggest rat file, Alembic file on disk is 642 MB. So these 13 rats are accounting for 6.4 gigabytes of space. And then overall, like the iterations of the shot, as you can see, we are at iteration 28. It's taking up 41.3 gigabytes something. So now what does this look like in pixel space? So a very simple shot, 80 frames only, 13 rats. And if you look at the green rat, like it's jumping and then it's just doing a scoot action, whoop, like it goes and then it stops. So not a big shot in terms of like the amount of data that it's generating. So you may ask, what is the solution? Because Alembics are industry standard, like everybody has been using. So what can we do to optimize Alembics? You can do certain things, but I think the gains that we got were a lot more than that we can do with Alembic optimizations. So our solution was kind of like being worked on the side. We were already working with crowds as we started working on like the animation side of things. So we were working with crowds, and we basically, that's what we did. This is our solution. Like we started using crowd system to render our hero animations. So if you look at this slide, now if you have worked with crowd system, you may be familiar with this thing. To create a crowd agent, you have your rest pose, you bring in your agent clip node, and then you start reading your animation clips exported from Maya inside of Houdini through the agent clip node. And this is it. Like, rather than exporting cycles to be used in the crowd system, we started exporting our hero animations, and then we plug the hero animations on the agent clip node. And we use this system to basically render those 13 rats or 25 rats or whatever rats were being exported as animated rats, hand animated rats. So so to put this in perspective, like what it did for us in numbers. As you can see, like if you remember from the previous slide, Alembic data was 6.4 gigabyte for 13 rats, and FBX data that we started exporting as skeletal animations. So it ended up being 67 some MB, so 5.2 MB per rat. So you can already see, like we went down from 64 gigabytes to 67 MB. And let's add the agent definition cache size, which was 85 MB in our case, to the mix, and also the rest pose that you have to create the agent with. So let's just add everything together. We end up with 179 MB compared to 6,500 MB. And the percentage reduction in this is 97%. So big number, 97%. May not mean anything to some of the people, but show this to your IT department and expect some beers and chocolates, if chocolates is your thing. So big number. And sorry, not forgetting the input-output speed now, speed gains that we got. Like, anything that we were exporting as FBXs from Maya was like super fast. Like, just because you can imagine, like, not exporting 6.4 gigabytes of data now on network. Depending on your network speed, you're just exporting mere 100 or 200 MB or 500 MB. So just gains and no pains, as I said. There were minor issues that we faced. If you remember, we started with Alembic caches as our asset. And then we suddenly switched to FBX system. Like, we started using our agent system to render our hero animations. Now, there was a mismatch between the vertex ordering between Alembic and FBX. Okay, I'm already losing audience. Thank you. Okay, so just kidding. So we found a mismatch between the vertex ordering between Alembics and FBX, but Houdini provides this node called primitive node, and this was not a big problem for us. We quickly found this node, and as you can see, I am scrubbing the U offset, and you see the order number changing. So in our case, a number of -1 in U offset made the match between Alembics and FBX, and this is how we solved the first issue. Second one was FBX doesn't support any kind of relational data shape between blend shapes. So if you have, like, your blend shapes being driven by constraints or expressions or set-driven keys, FBX will not carry that relationship. It will still give you blend shapes, but it will complain about anything which is complex. So answer to that is, like, you can export that relationship data as an external file, for example, or JSON file, and you can just specify, like, what is the driver and what is the driven, and then you can easily recreate that same like, relationship inside of Houdini using expressions or Vex or Python, so whatever you prefer. So 2 minor issues, but 97% gains on disk space. So I think this was our first step in optimizing the animation exports coming from Maya to Houdini. Second thing is we were looking at simulation. Now, simulations inside of Houdini uses packed agent primitives, so in itself they are pretty optimized. But we still added some more like procedural controls on top of already optimized systems to save us some input and output between our DCCs, different DCCs. So proceduralism essentially reduced our input and output, so saved time, and then let us create more iterations, and just let us enabled us to do just-in-time edits inside of lighting itself. So if you look at this slide, I'm showing, sorry. If you look at this slide, I'm basically, this is how, when you import FBX data in Houdini, this is how you will see it. You will have hierarchical data intact. So basically your rig from Maya comes in, or Blender for that matter, like any other DCC, comes in as is, and the geometry comes in as is, and if you dive inside the geometry nodes, you will see like it also has the skinning information intact and the weights are intact. It also FBX also brings in blend shapes along with it. Now, we were working with this system almost a year back, more than a year back. So, we were using FBX because that was like readily functioning in our pipeline. Now, USD also supports all this. I haven't personally started working with USD, but maybe next year's talk. So, in terms of crowds. So this is how the data comes in. You don't actually have to bring in FBX with all this. You don't have to keep the FBX as a graph inside of Houdini, but you can just read the FBX data on nodes like agent node or agent clip node. So that's exactly what we did. We started working with blend shapes. First thing, so if you have worked with the crowd system, you can write out agent definition caches on disk. And the way the caches look like, they are basically ASCII files on disk. You can right-click and open these in a text editor. And two important pieces of information in the rig file you will see is the transforms, and the other one is channels. Now, transforms contains the hierarchy of your rig, and the channels contain all the blend shapes that you export from in the FBX. So, since all this data is available and accessible, and Houdini provides mechanism to access this data and also alter the states of this data. For example, it provides agent edit node to control the joints and also control the blend shapes, and it, also of course the attribute wrangle node is there. You can put in you can use vex to set the values. So in this case, I'm using an agent edit node. All right, so the rat is winky rat. Rat is winking and smiling, but this is actually a snarl from side pose, but rats are funny creatures. So I'm controlling this using the agent edit node, and the fun part is like when you're working with singular animations, if you're bringing single animations from Maya, you can hook up the agent edit node and finesse it inside of Houdini. You don't have to go back to Maya and then make the smaller changes. So for example, if you get a note from supervisor that changed this minor thing, you can control that in Houdini. Now the second method is to use vex in an attribute wrangle, and Houdini provides this function called set agent channel value. Basically, you can target a specific channel, which is the blend shape name or blend shape ID, and then you can set the values. So what I'm doing here is I'm creating a blink cycle here, which is based on this spline ramp, and the bottom two values are zeros, and then the higher value is like how much the blend shape will be activated and what value it will have. So this is a blink cycle which is based on like the frame time. So as you can see, like I've hooked up two eye blinks and a half side of the snarl because we had like access to the left side and right side of the snarl. So the best part with this method for crowd system is the randomization, because every agent in the crowd system has a unique ID, and you can feed in that ID to the random function to get some offsets. So all your rats suddenly doesn't start blinking at the same time because they will look funnier than they are. So yeah, so really a powerful system. It saves us time. It saved us time and saved us disk space. Again, like I keep coming back to the disk space because now we are not exchanging data between two DCCs. All right. Yeah, this one, as an artist, everybody has dealt with this. You submit the best of your versions, and then you get a note, okay, can we have another version? Because this limb is like intersecting in that thing, and so rather than going back to Maya again, and then or back to other DCC, and then getting your edits from there, we used some proceduralism to control the joints and the hierarchy of the rats itself. So let me play this. If you notice on the left-hand side, I have this agent simulation. And this is the crowd sim that we did in Houdini. And I have some code on the right, which is controlling the motion of these rats after they have been simulated. So I'm going to let it play. PowerPoint is doing its own thing today. So basically what I'm doing is I have created this drop-down parameter where I have different body parts, for example, neck and tail, and all these body parts have like IDs associated with them. And we'll see how to access those IDs in the next slide. So as you can see, like, these, I'm adding like more motion on what we already have. And similarly, I am doing the same with the tail. Come on. All right, tail animation. So we have these tail animation now working inside of Houdini. Now mind it, like, these rats already have all the animation clips which we are using in the crowd system coming from Maya, but this way you can specifically control, like, random blanket animation, offsetted animation on all your crowd simulation once the simulation has been done. And also you can use the agent edit node to fine tune, like, specific agents at specific frames. So really powerful system. And the way you access the, sorry, let's go to the next slide. Are we? Okay. And a really a great thing about these agents is, like, you have access to the intrinsics. And if you look at in this geometry spreadsheet under intrinsics, you can see a lot of data packed in there. For example, the agent channel names will give you the names of the blend shapes. In this case, I'm showing agent local transforms. And if you see in the headers, you have IDs associated with these transforms. So you can easily find out, like, what is the ID for the neck or what is the ID for the spine, and then you can just feed it in the functions. So yeah, so this was some procedural fun that we had. What else? Another thing we noticed while working with the simulations were that we started working with single agent initially, because we had only one rig exported from Maya, and then we scaled up to 8 variations. And as soon as we started using 8 agent definition caches, our simulations just, the speed went down the drain. Everything was so slow. So what did we do about that? Basically, we fell back to using single agent. And because when you write out your simulations, the agent data is intact unless you kill all the attributes and you bake down your geometry. Your agent data is intact. So we leveraged that feature that we kept using single agent. And then we did our simulations, and then post-simulation, when we were done writing with the caches, we replaced single agent definition cache with multiple caches. It may not work for something like, some creatures which have like wide differences in shapes, for example, a lion and an elephant, for example. But it works pretty well for creatures that are like similar, spiders or birds or bees, rats in our case. Now, this gave us also capability to create a variation replacement system once the caches were done. And it also gave us speed gains, but also the variation replacement system when the caches were written out to disk. So, and it was also helpful not only for crowd sims, but also the animations that we were bringing in from Maya. So we will take a quick look on both the animation side of things and crowd simulation side of things next. So for animation, it was a really straightforward system. We already had 8 agent definition caches. We just hooked them to a switch node, and then we exposed the input value of the switch node in an HDA, which the lighters were able to control. So now imagine, like, you submitted your animation and your supervisor looked at it and he says, okay, this specific agent on this frame is not looking good. We need a different variant in place of this one. We need the brown rat, for example. We don't like the black rat in the center of the frame. So now you don't have to go back upstream. You can basically just move the slider and then choose your different variant, and then just kick off some renders and then quickly get feedback on them. So this is how we dealt with, like, creating a post-cache or post-animation variation replacement system for animations. And same thing work with the simulation variants as well. So as you can see in this video, I have the gray rats, which are single agents. And as soon as I click the crowd variation HDA, it immediately replaces the single agent definition with multiple agent definitions. And again, the system is similar. We bring in all the agent definition caches and merge them together, and then we basically just pick and give some weighting to the randomization. For example, like you have access to if you want like the red agents more, if you want the purple agents more. As you can see, like I'm driving the weight system here. So I'm adding to mix like the pink rats and then the purple rats, and so these are different variants. We just color coded them for easy recognizing. So this is a really powerful system because now you have complete control on after the simulation has been done. You can basically replace anything with anything if the hierarchy matches. So really powerful system. It gave us complete control over what we were doing. So yeah, I will let it play so that you can see all the nodes that we use to create the system. We are creating some clusters here and then running everything through for each and using some Python over here. So and Python portion is really really easy. Like you have these Houdini provides you two functions, find agent definitions, which looks for unique definitions in existing caches, and then replace agent definition, which gives you capability to replace the existing definitions with whatever you provide, and then you provide it with a dictionary map specifying what you need to replace and what you need to replace with, and basically that's about it. So yeah, this is everything we did for optimizing on the production side of things, and then I think next thing was the procedural and why we created the procedural. Mario is going to talk about that, but we were using point deform, and it was so slow. It was so slow for all the rats that we were animating and simulating. One shot contained 3,000 rats, for example. So yep, that's it from me.
All right. All right, so I'm going to pick it up where Amit left off. This wonderful animation stuff made it all possible to, speed up the generation of many rats. But the problem is many rats. And I think at the peak, we were able to render on the biggest, beefiest machine on the farm something in the order of 13 to 15 rats in one, so within frame. And the goal was to render 500, 1,000, 3,000. So we were far from our goal and already cooking our machines. So something had to be done. So we came up with a potential solution would have been to move a lot of the things that are happening in Houdini. What's happening really is that in the method that was sort of native to Houdini, is you have a guide deformer that applies the deformation of all of the fur strands onto the skin that deforms, and then unrolls all of that data into the scene definition file that is then fed to the renderer. Well, that means that there is huge files, terabytes big for many rats, and then the poor renderer has to load all this stuff and deal with it. So lots of data. So the idea was, well, let's move a lot of that generation over to render time. So what we're going to talk about here is render time, procedural for generation. So we're lifting all of that stuff that was happening inside of Houdini, moving it over to render time just before Arnold starts rendering the scene. Okay. There is enough detail in these slides to replicate everything that I'm going to talk about, but because I literally have 10 minutes, I won't be talking about all the details, but whoever finds themselves in this position of having to do some aspect of this adventure, then there's enough information in the slides for later perusal. You'll find all the sort of answers. So all I'm going to just talk about is the main key points, the highlights, and let you, dig deeper. Moving on. So the setup is as I said, 13 rats per frame was not going to work. What can we do here? Well, if we do a procedural for render time, that means that we have to write it in C++ as a procedural for Arnold. In our case, the target renderer is Arnold. It doesn't really matter, but that's our case. Would we have enough time within the 2 months, maybe a little over 2 months that we had in order to make this work, to do a full procedural generator? No, not really, because the sort of generalized idea of a generator, is that you take guide curves and you interpolate between them to generate the final density of the population of the fur. So that allows you to animate the guides. Let's say that there's wind blowing and the guides are fluttering, then your interpolated guides your interpolated final density will mimic that motion and so on. But there was no time to do that because there's a whole bunch of infrastructure that needs to be in place in order to do nearest neighbor searches that are, efficient and robust and all of these things. And that infrastructure wasn't in place. In fact, there was hardly any C++ libraries of any kind. So we chose to go for the second, an in-between kind of generator that took a fully realized final population of rest position, rat. So that's all the fur already generated, and then use that as on a rest posed skin, and then to apply the rest pose fur onto deforming skins. That would be enough for this application, at least. So that's all that was the constraint. We were not going to solve for the generic case. We're solving for what we need to solve in this case. And these rats don't need to have their fur blowing in the wind, so we're good. Aim for what we need, not for the best. Yeah, so that's the setup and the constraint set. The other constraint, of course, is that I didn't know Arnold from a hole in the wall at the time when we started this. So I had to learn the API. And that would consume some of the time budget to get this going. And so there were a lot of unanswered questions at the beginning. For example, I wasn't sure if we were going to need to have some kind of, save the rest positions and the rest fur to some intermediate file, cache, and then have the plugin load from file. It turned out, luckily, that was not necessary. The entry point, the initialization entry point of the plugin has visibility over the entire scene description in Arnold, which is great because that means that you can find anything that has been pushed onto Arnold from the point of view of the plugin. So the plugin can find anything. And this slide shows you some of the sort of the encoding that goes on from Houdini to Arnold. Those are details. So now that we know that Arnold has access to everything, we've done away with the need for an external sort of sidecar file need. That's gone. We're pulling straight from the scene description that's spooling up in memory. Then there's the detail of having to find out how Arnold encodes the actual geometry. So once you find your thing in the scene description, you have to open up the box and see what's inside. What's inside is, in our case, polymeshes and wires for the fur. Kind of what you would expect to see when you see a geometric definition for a polymesh, a bunch of points, indices to the points. I won't go into details, but you can look at the slide. The only thing that came up here that's probably worth mentioning is that Arnold has the reverse winding. So the winding is right-handed instead of left-handed. But those are details, and frankly, that happens with every freaking DCC. They all have their own ideas of, oh, let's go this way, and let's go that way. So yeah, not totally unexpected. So here's the main sort of trick. If you get this right, then you get your generator going. Houdini has intrinsic UV coordinates for every primitive type. We're talking exclusively about polygons here, and polygons have prim UVs. Primitive UVs are just intrinsic coordinate system that applies to the primitive, in this case a polygon. other implicit surfaces have their own coordinate systems, but we're talking about polygons here. So because we're doing this externally to Houdini, we have to sort of dive deep into how exactly do they interpret these primitive UVs. This had nothing to do with texture UVs. I want to make that clear. These are not projected texture parameters that are projected onto the surface. These are intrinsic to the primitive. Okay, so in order to replicate the exact behavior that we're getting in Houdini, we have to first find out what's going on inside of Houdini. Again, not going into details, but this explains all the details to when you go down this rabbit hole, there are details. There's 3 classifications or subclasses of polygons that they distinguish between in Houdini. There's 3-sided or triangles, there's quads, 4-sided, and then every other type of polygon face falls into the 3rd category of n-gons. So anything that has more than 4 sides, it's an n-gon. Interestingly, about 1/3 of the way into trying to reverse engineer a lot of this stuff, I discovered that there's documentation on this in the Houdini docs. This happens a lot. But I happen to agree. So I was I guess the comment here should be, the slides contain some detail that may not be in the docs, but the docs are actually really good. They do talk about not just the polygonal primitive, but other primitives as well. And I think the slides do offer more points of views and kind of dissect or formalize the algebra behind the interpolation. So stand back from all this detail stuff. The goal here is to be able to interpolate any attribute that is defined at the vertices of the face to the interior of the face at some location with some coordinate system that uniquely identifies that location within the face. And the accent is in uniquely. It has to be one single coordinate that addresses a single space. Once it does that, then the coordinate system works, everything's fine. All right, so here's a test to see how do we do. Oh, look at that. I can zoom in. So yeah, what I'm including here is the validation of the theory, the intuition that I just talked about. How well did we understand our analysis of all this? Well, here's the test. There's a VEX sketch. I like to work that way. I usually try to validate all of my understanding in VEX because VEX is awesome. Am I right? VEX is awesome. You can do just about anything in VEX. So, and also gives me an idea of what I'll have to implement on the C++ side. I mean, there's some things that you kind of take for granted in VEX, like matrix vector multiplication. You have to, anyway, it gives you a good idea of all of that, and it also validates your understanding of what's going on. Here, we're good. We're pretty much exactly on top of each other. So you'll notice that there's an RMSE measurement, which is a measurement of the error between what we predict the value should be of the interpolation and what the ground truth, in this case, is the prim UV call in VEX, which is what we're measuring ourselves against. And the match is really good. You can think of the RMSE thing as a distance from truth. And this is pretty much close to 0 within floating point accuracy. So we're good. So all of that takes us to the first science of life of our Frankenstein, which is this. And here we see on the left-hand side what you would see in the viewport in Houdini. In the middle, we have Houdini's own solution to the interpolated fur curves on this grid. And you can see that the interpolation is color, width, orientation. As this thing deforms, the right-hand side, which is our plug-in solution, is doing really well and matching Houdini pretty closely. This is the acid test. If you get this far, the rest is really what? I mean, there's complications in doing more than this, but this is the kernel that says you're on the good path and you might as well keep going because things are worth the effort from this point on. If we don't get to this point and you only have 2 months and you spend 2 weeks and you didn't get here, it's not gonna work. So, encouraging. Then I go on to describe some of the anatomy of how the HDA, so the front end, how this thing sort of takes on life inside of Houdini, what kind of parameterization is exposed to the artist, how do they, but I'm not going to bore you to tears with all of that because you can read about it later. And I'm running out of time. Okay, so next thing is, we got the plugin now is able to replicate the behavior that's in Houdini in terms of interpolating any kind of attribute, orientations, which are given in terms of quaternions in our case. I should have mentioned that. So there's basically primitive number and primitive UV. That triplet gives you the location of the root of each strand within a face. But that's not enough. Then you need an orientation to tell you how the rest of the curve is oriented relative to the plane of the face. So that orientation, we condensed it because it's the smallest version, is a quaternion that gives you can imagine that if you had normals, point normals, you can visualize point normals as being the average normal of all the incident faces that are incident to that point. So you see it standing at, well, quaternions are the same, except that instead of being a single direction, it's a full frame that's attached to each point. And then we interpolate that, the plugin interpolates that orientation as well when it's deforming. One issue that I don't think I put into the slide, so I'll mention it here because it just popped into my head. When you're deforming surfaces from some rest position to some extreme deformation, so extreme that some of the faces may intersect with each other, you're creating these really deep deformations. It is possible for the, I think it's called attribute reorient SOP, which is the one that can calculate the frame, the orientation frame, and express it in the form of a quaternion. That result will be correct, always. But like any angular measure, you have two correct versions of the same frame. You have a negative and a positive. So the polarity of the quaternion is something you should watch when you have the output of the reorient. So this is like little PSA warning. So crap, I'm running out of time. So the next things we did are kind of a little bit low-hanging fruit here. We added frustum calling and occlusion calling. So that means do not include into the render stream anything that's not in the frustum or being occluded by other geometry. There's about a 20-minute talk that I could give on this because it's not as simple as you think. When you have packed agents start life from a particle system. That's the idea that you were talking about. The particle system can birth and kill particles at any given moment. That means that the death and birth of any particle could happen within the motion blur window. So this thing, which sounds so nice and easy, which is frustum calling and occlusion calling, takes on a whole different dimension when you take into account the fact that you cannot change the topology because you're doing deformation blur. So you're not going to be cutting points and splicing your creature in half. That's not going to work. You also have to take into account motion. So, and it's not just central velocity, single vector per creature, because these creatures are like deforming like crazy. And the whole tail of the rat is about as big as the body. So if it's curled up and then it bounces up, suddenly you have, So motion is complex over time. Long story short, we ended up with a sort of stochastic or random sampling over space and time to get this sort of coverage in space over that motion blur window. And then, based on that, deciding what lives and what dies and what stays and what goes. Okay, great. That's that. The next thing, and the one that actually contributed the most to the whole savings, is level of detail of the final population of the fur. If you have like 1 million strands per rat, that's only really meaningful when it's up close and personal to the camera, because otherwise you'll never see it, obviously. I mean, it sounds like trivial and obvious, but to actually implement it, it's tricky because you can't pluck hairs out as you go as you go out in depth. Or you can, but you have to do it carefully. And that's what this is. I'm going to kind of run quickly through this. This is the rat in the worst possible light, meaning it's furnace lit, which is light from all directions, the same intensity, and decimation happening as it recedes back in space from 100% population to 5% population. So that's a gain of 90%, 95%. And there is a tiny bit of popping that's visible. So what we're doing is we're decimating as we go in further back in depth, but at the same time, we're changing the parameters of the ones that remain such that they in proportion to the decimation, so that we can cover this process that is really discrete. You're plucking out stuff with something that's a little more continuous, which is the width change of the remaining population. It's not a perfect mask, and it can be improved on, but we didn't have time to do better than that. So we ended up using that, and here's sort of the final look at how we did. The first row shows you the base case, and where this is the cost at the end, the last column, is a weighted cost that takes into account the time that it took to create the scene description file, the amount of space and disk that it took. So different weights for each one of the things, that all the measures that we care about. And taken, so the fully considered cost, let's call it. So the base case, we're assigning the value of 1. The second case shows you what the gains are for just simply having the most bare bones generator that only simply really is only not much more than an analog to the guide deform SOP. It's just grabbing a static fur description and plunking it down onto deforming. So that gives you already a 20% reduction in cost, or a 1.25 times improvement. But when you put all the other things that I talked about, so the frustum calling, the occlusion calling, the LOD decimation, all the stuff, we get down to some real good stuff, which is, a 90% reduction in cost, or a 10-fold improvement in overall things. I'll stop there, but I'll quickly mention the appendix. All of these frames that I've been showing you that are rendered on the hull of what should be a subdivision surface. Things get tricky when you want to plant those roots at the limit surface of the hull. That brings in open subdiv and other libraries and whatever. And there's also a really interesting issue with, I talked about, I'm almost done, I swear. I talked about forward interpolation before, when you're given the UVs and the primitive number, then the UVs, and then you go and you sort of linearly combine the weights and your attributes, and magic happens and you interpolate. That's easy. Now, if you want to go the opposite way, and you're given the interpolated value, and you have to produce the coordinate UV, things get tricky. As is usual with anything, when you're trying to find the inverse of any function, it's surprisingly much harder than you would imagine. And this is no exception. So down this rabbit hole we went, and there's some comparison again. There's a sketch in Vex of all of this. And you can see, again, all this stuff is available. You will notice, I'll just make a quick note because it's kind of funny. I ended up super close with my analysis, like super close. And it's valid too, because it's close and valid. There's no illegality about the coordinate system that I ended up with. But it's a tiny bit different from what Houdini says the ground truth should be. And the result is good enough. I mean, there is the polygonal thing on the left and the limit surface on the right. So because it didn't match and I was really out of time, I just labeled it as beta and called it a day and moved on, as any self-respecting dev ought to do. So, but anyway, it wasn't crashing. It was okay. It was good. So that's it. Thank you. So I guess, I don't know, do we have time for
Yeah.
questions? Yeah? Okay, cool.
Questions, anyone?
The final product. Have you rendered in Houdini? Hello.
Oh, the target renderer is Arnold.
Arnold in Houdini or other
in
DCC?
Houdini.
Oh, right.
Okay.
It's called from inside Houdini, yes.
Okay, so you just kept the same way and just push it to lighting, right? So you don't have to cache it for something else.
No, exactly. It goes straight from Houdini. And yeah.
Because in our case, we're packaging everything for Maya. So we're doing everything in Houdini, but we're packaging in Maya yet. So it's just better to keep it in Houdini this way.
Be in Houdini as much as possible.
I got it. Yeah, okay. Well, great approach. Love it.
It's magic.
Hey, cool talk.
Thanks.
I was wondering, on the FBX import side, you're using the OBJ level FBX importer.
No.
But you had the whole graph there.
I was showing.
Just to show the graph.
I was showing like just to get an idea of like how your rig will look like. You can import it at the OBJ level, and then you can take a look, and from an FX artist point of view, they can have an idea what joints are called or what blend shapes are called and everything. So quick peek, but you just import FBXs on your agent clip node, and then yeah, that's it.
Cool.
My name's Steve, by the way.
Hi, Steve, Brett.
Oh my goodness.
Cool
I was
glasses.
Thank you. I was just wondering, you did a lot of work on figuring out the UV placement on triangles, quads, and n-gons. Could you not yell at your modelers and not have n-gons in your geometry?
You know what? As I said,
Did you have a lot of n-gons?
No, as I said at the beginning, there are a few, and I know because that's where it exploded. When I was initially trying to do this, it's like, oh, I guess the interpolation didn't work there. But yeah, so there were some. You can never, what are you going to do? Tell them no n-gons. No, that's not going to work. So. And also, plus, as I mentioned at the beginning, this was already going, so things had been approved and models had been made, and looks. So we couldn't touch that.
You were T minus 2 months. So
Yeah. So that's why a lot of his work was to do, just-in-time edits of animation after the fact.
And the client had, client mandate was that the rats are going to be very close to the camera, so make them as pretty as possible and as disgusting as possible. But so and the turntables that we were sending to clients were really close, so that they get a sense of like every hair stand is there. So things are done before it reached Mario. It's always the case, right?
Fix it now.
Yeah.
Great talk, thanks. I have a maybe dummy question, but it's about the original groom you have for the rat. So, and you said that that you did the procedure creation of that for inside the Arnold, but what's the how you transfer it, like the basic look? I just didn't get it.
The shading you're talking about?
Not the shading itself, but the how the groom looks.
So what happens is that the groom artist it produces a static groom on the rest pose.
Yes, that's what I'm asking about, the how you transfer the rest pose. It was
to Arnold.
Yes.
Okay, so what happens is you can sneakily inject data into the stream that's going to go to Arnold, even though you're not necessarily going to render it. But you don't have to tell Arnold that. You can just say, here's the thing, and you need to include it. But primary rays don't care, shadow rays don't care, indirect rays don't care. So it's like it's there. And frankly, that's exactly what we did. I mean, it's not a renderable object per se, but it has enough hooks to make Arnold not discard it.
So that whole thing was your plugin did the just placing on the agents.
Pretty much.
And render time.
That rest pose, just distributing on everything.
Yes.
Yes.
If we didn't have the for procedural, then the regular method that we were doing was we were injecting the final hair gen, the combination of all the hair gens that we had written out to disk. We were injecting that as a layer in the agent, and then we were deforming it with the guide deform at the end of it.
Yeah, I got it. Thanks.
somewhere over there.
Sorry, one more question. In terms of what would do you have any plans for where to take this for the future?
Well, for me, I have been having some awesome conversations with people who know a lot about stuff in this wonderful SIGGRAPH. And I've come to learn about USD procedurals. And I've decided and would recommend that nobody wastes any more time and starts using that. At least according to Kristen, so you can point the finger at him. Yeah. So yeah, this is. I mean, if it's an agnostic, if it's a procedural that's agnostic to the target, whatever it may be, the renderer, Arnold, who cares, whatever, then that's the pot of gold. Because why would you waste your time? You reconfigure first, learning the API of some target, and then reconfiguring everything, and going through all the motions of stuff. Yet again, this is the promised land, would be a generic procedural thing. And according to some people, that is attainable in USD as a USD procedural. And if that's true, I'll take you to your word. Then that's the way to go. Whatever that is, whatever schemas are involved, whatever complexities are involved, it's worth spending time on that and not on this. So that's where I'm going to be taking it next to answer. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Okay. Thanks.
Next year's talk. Book your
Next
seats.
year's, maybe. Yeah. That's a really good question. Oh, you know what? No, I also heard that there's already a procedural for offered by side effects, and it's funny because it always seems to happen. I just finished mapping the entire ocean tools to Arnold. And yesterday I hear from Kristen, oh yeah, we're going to do our ocean tools. And it's going to be free, and it's not going to pull a token. Oh, I shouldn't say that out loud. I'm not sure if that's official yet, but yeah. So, because it's like, oh great, but it's going to take a license token? No, it won't. Okay, then I just wasted my time. Yeah. No, I think that's the way to go for sure. And in terms of open sourcing, I don't see the studio folks, or at least the people that I deal with at the sort of R&D side, are very open to that. So the answer might be yes or no. I'm not sure, but they're not against it. So could be interesting. Sure. Yeah. It would be nice. Like that.
I'd like to point out as well that Amit and Mario also were recognized with a VES nomination for this work on Cabinet Curiosities, so it was also quite recognized by the rest of the industry.
Thank you. Thanks.
If only your boss was here to talk about the open source question.
If only. We're on a plane tomorrow.
I have a quick question about your LODs and the fur. Are those LODs locked down at render, or are they procedurally shifting based on distance?
The fur procedural?
Yes.
The LOD aspect of the procedural?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, the procedural is doing the decimation because it's its job to create the fur. It can be pre-done. So the only thing that we're really measuring, so the parameter space of the decimation is just two parameters. It's like how far, the artist has to answer, how far from camera would you say is your mid-ground, where we start doing the decimation. That's the orthogonal distance, so depth from camera. And at what rate do you want to decimate based on depth? If you do the math, the real amount would be inverse square log, But they can choose linear decimation or square decimation, quadratic, whatever. Those are the parameters. And then based on that, we tag the creatures in frame, would pre-measure the depth of the frames, and we bind that to the detail when we send it to the generator. The generator then that picks up for any given animated skin, it'll go, instead of measuring itself from the camera and trying to why? We already have the information, so we kind of bundled it up. And then it goes, okay, you have decimation turned on. At this depth, given all those parameters, then we're going to give you want 50% of the fur. And really, right now, this is a Neanderthal implementation of the thing. It's like, yeah, we're going to pluck shit out. And that's what it does. It could be a lot smarter, and it would have been if we had enough time. You could decimate based on occlusion from point of view, right? You don't need to pluck the thing that's obvious and disgusting in front of you if you can pluck behind. All of the back end of the creature could be plucked out, frankly, without changing what? These things are not reflective, so secondary rays don't really play a role, but shadow rays do. So you want to keep bulk without keeping detail. Like high frequency stuff, who cares? And it's just, shadow cones that you're trying to preserve. In other words, you can be a lot smarter than what we just did here. But even in this form, it's really hard to tell, and especially that test that I showed, the creature wasn't moving, the rat wasn't moving, everything was exposed, and in all of the animations, most of the rats were moving in their own depth planes. They weren't going, So much of it was masked anyway.
Sometimes
we got away with
did, and their system worked fine.
And sometimes they did, and it still worked okay, because, bokeh.
Great.
So from artist perspective, like we just gave them a control. They would just place it around where the animation is happening or the simulation is happening, and then that was like an approximated distance from camera, and that's what the system cared about. So,
Great, got it. Thank you so much.
All right. That's it, guys. We're running over. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you,
everyone.
guys.